Dana, hello and welcome to the Light Path podcast. And really, the month of May is the Dana Doswell month, all about the nervous system and healing that. So, welcome to the family.
Thank you so much. I love that. And I'm just so honored. The month of the nervous system sounds really incredible to me.
Oh, amazing. So, for those of you listening, Dana and I are going to dive into a chat today about the nervous system to understand exactly what it is. And then in a couple of weeks, Dana's going to come back to us with shame because shame is a big part, what I've learned from you, of nervous system deregulation. And so we're going to have a really deep chat about that. But I'd love to kick off the episode by saying that Dana is someone that I have been following for a while now on socials, and her content is just so relatable, so down to earth, but also so practical. So I highly encourage you on the outset to head to the show notes and follow her on her socials. But I would love to hear from you, your story. I mean, how did you get into this work where you're really helping, empowering people to heal and transform and really get that beautiful autonomy in their lives?
Thank you for starting off with this. It's actually really cool, the timing, because I've been reflecting on this a lot lately as I've just kind of been getting lost in a good way in the work that I'm doing and kind of forgotten that I almost had this life beforehand that was on a completely different trajectory. And it's funny because growing up, like I have a dad that's an engineer, super logical. And I was just from a young age was like, yep, I'm going to be exactly like my dad. And I'm going to go into math and I'm going to go into accounting and finance and all of this stuff. And meanwhile, I always had this deep fascination with psychology and emotions, but I was really scared of them. And that was definitely a part of me that I suppressed. So kind of like going through my life, I always, was incredible at writing and speaking, and math was actually super hard for me. But because of a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today, I was like, writing and talking, that's not a real job. That's not going to get me, where I want to go. And I had a lot of this conditioning around pick the logical, practical, guaranteed, predictable path to security. And so that really influenced me a lot. And I think that this is actually where a huge part of why I got to where I am today started, because that to me is really one of the most fundamental ways that I was suppressing the natural biological cues of my body and my nervous system telling me what innately or inherently felt good for me. And eventually this led me to when I was in university, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do a double major with finance and accounting. I'm going to become an accountant. I'm going to become a chartered professional accountant, which you meet me today and people are just like, what? You are not the accountant vibe. So I'm in university. I was actually pretty good at it. But one of the reasons I was so good at it was because I was really good with clients. I was good with the people part of it and connecting to people and making them feel safe. But all of this was just something I didn't even realize I was doing. And so kind of fast forward to like, I'm in my job. It's my first 3 months. I was working at a big accounting firm called KPMG. And I just looked around, and on our first day, they told me to look at the team of people that I was working with. And they're like, these are the people that are going to be at your wedding. And I just remember looking around and I was like, oh, good God, like, where am I and what is happening right now? So I ended up only staying there for 3 months because literally on day one, I realized not for me, no way in hell. And from there, I transitioned into doing tech sales, which is where I really started to experience burnout because I went from this super predictable, you're going to get a paycheck, you're an accountant kind of thing, to what initially attracted me to sales, which was this really unhealthy narrative of you eat what you kill. So, commission, everything is this super big peak and then super big down afterwards. And the target is always moving. And so at this time, I had undiagnosed ADHD. I had, no idea why this felt so addictive yet stressful to me. And after working there for about a year, I started my own company, which was the next level of this. Like, you really eat what you kill. And I moved to Mexico, where I was completely isolated by myself because I didn't know anybody. And I really, I think from the outside, had this life. I think a lot of people, we've heard this story before of like the entrepreneur that looks like they're living the life, like they're, in a foreign country, they're building something they believe in, like they're, going after it. And I started to experience what I now know as functional freeze, where I would be on client calls or I'd be doing work and I would be so activated and on. And then as soon as the calls were over, I would just collapse. And it was just this really crazy experience of almost two different versions of myself. And eventually I came to the point where I was really struggling to even get out of bed. I'd had chronic cystic acne for like over 14 years at this point. I was constantly getting sick. My immune system was just destroyed. I would get throat infections, skin infections. Like my body was just screaming at me. And I went through a whole part of this too, where, going through the normal medical system, it was like, take Accutane, take all of these super intense pharmaceutical medications that definitely still have an impact on my nervous system today, and not in a good way. And I remember I was in Mexico and I kind of just had a moment where I saw something that really made me realize that, wow, this could literally be how I'm going to live for the rest of my life if something doesn't change. So I tried to go to cognitive behavioral therapy again, didn't really do anything for me. And then I started this exploration of, okay, what is a more holistic view? Came across the term spiritual psychology, which ended up leading me to this woman. And it's so crazy. This is where I do really believe that there is like a soul and an energy to the universe, because I found this woman who I've now been working with for 4 years. And she didn't even remember putting her profile up on this website that I found her on. And she's like, I have never associated myself with spiritual psychology. And so she doesn't even know how I found her. But it was through doing sessions with her. She's a somatic counselor, that I started to get into the world of somatics and feeling and not using my mind for everything. And that just, for lack of a better term, like blew the head off my body. And then I was like, oh my God, I have a body. Holy shit. And then I started to feel a lot more. And then I started to research, like, what is happening to me? Why am I feeling so much? And why does this feel good, but scary? And oh my God, I almost feel out of control, but in a good way. Came across the nervous system and polyvagal theory. And that just, I had a huge emotional reaction to it. It was like my whole life made sense. And that really sparked this for me. And I spent about 2 years applying everything that I was learning, working with this woman, and then realized that mostly, or nobody in my life knew anything that I had learned, and it was not common knowledge. And that's where I started to say, okay, I'm going to start to share this a little bit. Started sharing it on my personal Instagram, and it kind of, over the last couple of years, has just continued to grow and grow. And now we're here, and this is what I do for a living. I am the most regulated and healthy that I've ever been. And it's really incredible just to be here to talk with you about it and to just share this story. So thank you for listening to that.
No, thank you for being so honest and sharing with us. And I think that a lot of people that do work that really aims to empower others have been through such disempowering experiences. And I think that by doing that, whoever we hold, we know, we know where you're at, but we also know where you could be. And so I think that that makes it all the more meaty and realistic. I think you said something really interesting right at the end there. You said when you found this work, you started to talk about it and realize that not too many people actually knew what you were talking about. And I think that's one of the things that I really love to do in these chats with people, is demystify these words that actually become part of our vernacular really easily. But do we actually really understand what they mean? And the nervous system, those three words are words that I hear so much in this space, and I see it so much through social media. But if I had to give someone a definition of the nervous system, I personally would be completely lost. And so I want to break it down. Like, what does that actually even mean? Nervous system 101, hit us.
Okay. So when we're in the conversation of whether it's trauma recovery, mitigating stress, we're talking about a specific part of the nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. So this is the part of your nervous system that is responsible for governing the way that your body unconsciously responds to stress. And what it also does is it regulates things like your breathing, your heart rate, your body temperature. This is where your hunger cues, your appetite cues, your thirst cues come from. So something I always love to say to people is, like, if you're suppressing your need to go to the washroom, you're suppressing your nervous system.
Oh my gosh. Can I say one of your posts
Yes.
literally changed my life? Because I think you said that. And I think one of them was around eating as well. So just for background for you, even though listeners know this, I used to be a teacher. And so you couldn't go to the washroom or eat whenever you wanted to. And I went from school to university to school. And so up until, my early 40s, it was so regimented that my nervous system is shot. That I know. I can't define it, but I just know that it's shot. But one of your posts, like the small, this is why I love you. One of your posts was just like, when your body's telling you you're hungry, do you put off the food? Do you like delay the food, say, once I finish this, I do that? And I realized when it comes to going to the restroom, when it comes to eating, I do that all the time. And for me, that was the first practical step of getting into my nervous system and go, oh, I need to go to the restroom. Go. Or, oh, I could really do with a snack. Have it.
Absolutely. And that's where I also do think that I'll say two things on this. Number one is the nervous system is actually really difficult to define because there's so many different parts of it. And this is something that I have been in like a loving struggle with because it's so at the center of everything. So your nervous system modulates and regulates and signals to all other systems in your body. So your endocrine system, which is your hormonal system, and your immune system are regulate. Actually, okay, here's a really maybe clearer way of explaining it. Your nervous system is your body's core energy management system that is dictating where your physical energy goes and how much and why. So you think about it like there's this little decision-making center, which is your nervous system. And your nervous system is saying, okay, we're in a pretty threatening environment right now. So we're going to take energy away from our immune system because we don't need that in this moment. We need to turn on our stress chemistry. We need to elevate cortisol and adrenaline, and we need to increase and push ourselves into a state of hypervigilance. So your energy management system, your nervous system, is dictating where the flow of energy goes, which is what your nervous system eventually learns to attune to and focus on. So other ways that I like to also describe the nervous system is it's like a tuning fork. It is what your body will move towards or away from, depending on the level of threat perception that your nervous system has learned to associate with that environment. And from a physical perspective, your brain is actually the most recent development of your nervous system from an evolutionary perspective. And so for women, our pelvic bowl and our uterus are all interconnected with our nervous system, which is something that men don't have, which is so cool. One of the reasons we're also more sensitive because we have bigger hormonal fluctuations throughout the month that dictates the level of sensitivity of our nervous system. And then you've also probably seen the vagus nerve, which is part of your parasympathetic nervous system, which connects to your heart and all of the major organ systems in your stomach and is kind of the highway between your body and your brain. So all of this to say is it makes sense that it's really hard to define the nervous system because there is like the tangible physical nerves and the vagus nerve that exists in our body. And then there's this really almost beautifully mysterious aspect of how it's a tuning fork and how it modulates and how it interprets the world around you. And that's where it's important to have the conversations around evolution, evolutionary psychology, developmental psychology, and understanding the impact of culture and environment on the way that your nervous system learns to perceive your reality and how you fit into it.
Interesting, because I had anticipated asking you, how is it that we come disconnected from our nervous system? But what I've just learned is, in fact, we're very connected to our nervous system, but it's the conditioning of how it works and where it focuses the flow of energy is more out of repeated habits, society, culture, and experiences that we've had. So how does that then go into, like, how do you then become an observer of your nervous system to find out where this flow of energy is naturally or instinctively going because of all of that?
So one thing that you just said is, I think, a great frame for it. So our nervous system is always sending cues to our body. And the way that we quote unquote disconnect from it is learning to suppress and resist it. So where you are suppressing and resisting is essentially directly where we want to go in order to start to listen and allow for the flow of your nervous system cues to be essentially arisen to the level of your conscious awareness so that you can start to act on them. So people often think, going back to some of these basic examples, that what they learn is, oh, I'm in a Zoom call with my boss. It is unsafe to have a need. It is unsafe to have a need to go to the washroom. And I'm actually placing the potential comfort of my boss over the biological need of my body, because that is what I was conditioned to do. However, your body still needs to go to the washroom. So that need is still there. And the actual healing journey part of this is deconstructing what emotional charge and emotional sandwich makes up the conditioning that has led you to believe that your safety lies in suppressing your need and over focusing on the needs or potential needs that you don't even know how your boss would respond, instead of being able to fulfill the need of your body. So that's really how we can start to see it in action, is where is that suppression and where is the over focus on other people happening?
But we're so conditioned to over focus on other people. And I think it's actually only getting worse with the rise of social media and the way in which now we interact, because a lot of that is actually perception focused instead of expression focused. Of course, you get people that aren't like that, yours truly, but there's that layer there. And so it feels almost like a radical or rebellious act to actually be the observer of your nervous system. What are some practical ways in which you can do that besides observation and just that drilling down, that questioning?
So in the sense of like, how can you start to work with your nervous system?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to break this down into layer number one of what is the most foundational piece of working with your nervous system. It is identifying what kind of relationship you have with your basic human body needs and what kind of relationship you have with your wants and desires. And the reason that I say this is because a lot of the nervous system work that we see is like the energy work, and it can be very spiritual and beautiful and cerebral. And it's a lot of the, like, what am I visioning for my life? Like, how, what do I want? What is my creativity? What is that clarity speaking to me? And meanwhile, you literally feel ashamed of having basic human needs, and you're ashamed of the wants that you have for your life. So the level of safety that is needed for you to be in flow state and access, the visioning and the creativity doesn't exist at a sustainable level. And so this is really one principle that I want to bring in, is that your nervous system needs a healthy balance of safety and stress. And this can be kind of scary a little bit, because for most of us, we're so stressed that the idea of being stressed is like we want to actively move away from it. Which brings us to the next point, which is regulating your nervous system, especially in the initial restoration phase. So restoring you back to a baseline level of regulation is much more about improving your ability to experience the heavy, dense, shamey, resentful, painful emotions that you're experiencing right now. You actually have to get better at experiencing them, because what this does is it increases your window of tolerance and you're no longer suppressing. Because again, if we're sitting here and I'm like, I feel shame and I want to get rid of the shame so that I can experience more joy, the body and the nervous system doesn't work like that. You have to go through the shame. Why is there so much shame here? How do I experience this? What environments make me experience shame? How is my self-talk reinforcing that? How can I actually start to normalize and validate my human needs and my wants in order to be a safe person for myself? So I hope that either answered your question or gave you something to kind of dig into a bit more.
Yeah, I love that, because in my former life as an early childhood specialist, it's like so many times saying to parents, like, you don't learn to emotionally regulate unless you emotionally regulate. And, I think from probably the 90s onwards, children were brought up by parents that were so invested in parenting and so in a loving and well-intentioned way, that parenting became an honor and a badge and a joy almost. And so part of that was making childhoods perfect. And we've ended up with these now young adults or adults that find it really hard to regulate emotions because they've never been able to feel safe in those really tricky ones. I remember anger was one of the very first emotions that I worked on at the start of my path in my early 30s because for the social stigma around anger and how we weren't supposed to feel it. So I love that whole permission that what you've just said has given us of you are so permitted to feel the tricky emotions, and the more you give yourself permission to feel them, I think we feel like we're falling down Alice's rabbit hole or whatever she went down, and like it would never end, but I can attest it ends, and like you say, you just build that capacity to hold it.
And one of the other things you're just reminding me of right now that's so important to understand is, and if anybody listening to this has come from like a religious background that was not too kind to you, and maybe you went from like the religious to new age spirituality route. I did not get brought up religious, but I did go the new age spirituality route for a little while. And what you'll notice is there's a focus on ascension and purity in both of these cultures, and ascension. So you're ascending out of the human body. And this is inherently dysregulating because you're in a human body. That's the only way that you can experience reality. So my focus is actually supporting people with descending into the body and being able to accept, like radical acceptance of the messiness. And this word might resonate for some people, the sometimes dirty feeling that we often are conditioned to associate with being human, and like having these needs and these, the flesh and the body. And like, I always say, like, a regulated body is a hungry and a horny body. And I never heard anything like that when I was in this like energy workspace. It was all like, what color is your aura? What color is your soul? And I'm like, that can be so powerful. And that's really great. But if my soul and my aura is only something I can experience as outside of my body because my body is too dirty to house it, then I'm not vibing with that. Like that's not the human experience.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I love that. To kind of wrap up our nervous system 101 chat, can I just ask you about the phases or the stages of the nervous system? I think there's 4.
It depends. I've also seen a graph with like 7.
Oh,
So there's three main fundamental states that have micro states within them.
okay.
So you have the nervous system spectrum. So this is like polyvagal theory 101. You have the nervous system spectrum. You have the parasympathetic, also known as rest or digest. This is where our body, from an evolutionary and health perspective, we are meant to exist here most of the time, like 80 to 90% of the time. Rest or digest, there's no threat present that you are responding to. So going back to your nervous system being your energy management system, you're not having to divert energy to mobilize or collapse in the face of a threat. You're vibing, you're chilling, you're in flow, you're able to connect with other people, you're able to experience empathy because there's enough safety for that to occur. So in our modern times, the example I like to give, you're having your morning coffee and you're reading, like me, you're like reading Harry Potter and you're just enjoying it. And you have your phone sitting next to you and you get the little ding and it's an email from your boss or somebody at work saying, hey, we need to jump on a call as soon as you see this. Like, can you, send me a Zoom link? We need to have a chat. What starts to happen is you start to activate that sympathetic activation, which is the next state on the nervous system spectrum, is what your body starts to move towards because you are now experiencing potentially a threat. And this is important because your body's like, oh my God, what is about to happen? There's so much uncertainty, which is a huge factor in what we perceive as threatening. There's a huge amount of uncertainty. I need to be somewhere. And also it's pretty jarring, right? Like you're going from relaxed to automatically something just came into your awareness and has kind of pulled you into a new state. So this is where you see the fight or flight, and people can either tend more towards flight, which might be somebody who sees that notification and is like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what the hell is happening? They start walking around their house and they're like, can I just pretend that I didn't see this for another 30 minutes because I need to just chill out before I do this, which is the person moving away from the threat. And then there's the person, the fight, that wants to move towards it and is like, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, we'll put a language order.
Okay.
Don't go for it.
Okay. Like, who the fuck is emailing me at this time in the morning? Like, let's get on this call. What the hell do they want? Like, I'm gonna kind of like get in their face kind of thing. And so
Mm.
that's the fight person. They're moving towards the threat. So what starts to happen is two things. Either you're in a situation like that and your neuroception, which is the term that describes how your nervous system is scanning your environment and is assessing what level of threat is present. Your neuroception is going off. And so if you're, person A, you're like, cool, I'm hanging out in sympathetic activation because this is super stressful. Your person B, who maybe last week was told that they weren't performing super well and get the same message, and they interpret it as so stressful, so threatening to their survival that they can go through fight or flight, but they can also go into complete freeze, which is on the verge of dorsal vagal shutdown. This is where you start to numb out, you dissociate. This is really associated with too many emotions, complete overwhelm. And this is when your body essentially says there's no way to run away from or fight this threat. So the option that is coded into our nervous system and our survival physiology is to shut down, like how a deer will play dead. And there are phases within all of this. Like we have functional freeze, which is I think what most people are living in today, where you're flip-flopping a lot between the fight or flight and the freeze state and that kind of shutdown feeling. And so your body actually evolved to be able to seamlessly move through these three states because it's important to be able to activate in the face of a threat. It's important to have that shutdown, numb out if you are about to die and like a bear is going to eat you because you're not going to feel the pain as much. But in our society, the types of threats are not as physical, generally speaking. They're much more psychological, but our stress physiology is interpreting it in the same way. And so this is how we can see that actually feeling anxious is normal and healthy when there is a reason to be anxious. But what we want is to not be stuck in those chronic states and be able to downregulate and come back into that parasympathetic state or hang out closer to that area. So that's kind of polyvagal theory 101 overview.
I love 101s. So I'm here for all of that and the practical implications of that. Thank you so much for this chat. I feel like I've gotten a better kind of grounded understanding of the nervous system. And in our next chat, we are going to dive into, I think, one of the least talked about and shadow, literally, experience of the human psyche, which is shame. So, as I said at the beginning, check out the show notes. But Dana is coming back in a couple of weeks to talk to us about shame and the nervous system and how to regulate that. But for today, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.